Hello, welcome to today's video. Today we are going to be talking about the elementary theory of demand. Demand is a very important aspect of economics, and I know that we already have an idea of what demand is, but today we're going to be looking into demand, the laws of demand, the types of demand, the demand schedule and demand curve, looking at the exceptions to the laws of demand, the factors that affect demand. What is demand? We already have an idea. Demand is just basically a desire, a need, a want that is backed up by the ability to pay. So demand is not just a mere wish. You have to have the ability to pay for it. There is the need for money for that wish. That is what is called effective demand. The wish, desire, want, need that is backed up by the ability to pay. In simpler terms, demand is just basically the number of goods and services a consumer is willing and able to buy at given prices at a particular period of time. The amount of goods a consumer is willing and able to buy at given prices at a particular period of time. Demand for a commodity implies the desire of a commodity that is backed up by the ability to pay, the consumer's willingness to buy the product, and the purchasing power that the consumer has to get the product. The next we have is demand schedule and demand curve. A demand schedule is just a table that shows the various amounts of goods and services consumers are willing and able to buy at a particular period of time, over a period of time. The amount of goods and services consumers are willing and able to buy at a given period of time. From the table, we can see that when the price of the commodity was 2, demand was 10. When it became 4, demand decreased to 8. When it became 6, demand became equal. So it continued reducing like that, which explains the law of demand. But let's deal with this first. So we have two types of demand schedule. We have individual demand schedule and we have market demand schedule. We have the individual and the market demand schedule. The individual demand schedule states the quantities of a commodity that a consumer or household would purchase at different prices. Just like the table that was given, it shows the quantity of goods and services an individual would purchase at different prices. When it was 2, it became 10. The price increased to 4. It became 8. The price increased, and as it continues to increase, demand continues to decrease. While market demand is the aggregate of all individual demand schedules. That is the aggregate of the individual demand schedules, the summation, adding up of all the demand schedules to bring that brings about the market demand. From the table, we can see that there were as the price of the commodity increased, as the price of the commodity decreased, the demand increased. That is, as you see, when it was $10, some people did not purchase any of the goods at all. It remained on 0, while some only got 1. When it became $9, some still remained on 0, while others bought more. When it went down to 8, people started buying more because they could now afford it. So a market demand schedule is basically the addition or aggregate of all the demand schedules, all the individual demand schedules. That is the summation of the various amount of goods and services individuals or consumers in an economy are willing and able to buy at given prices over a given period of time. A demand curve, as we can see there, is just basically the representation of a demand schedule on a graphical curve. It's the graphical representation of a demand schedule. Moving to the laws of demand. it states that as the price increases, demand decreases, and as the price of a commodity decreases, demand increases. Ceteris paribus, that is other things being equal. As the price increases, demand goes down. As the price decreases, demand comes up, just like we've seen in the tables shown earlier. We saw that when the price was high, people did not really buy much of that good, but when it became low, people started buying more of the goods. Just like that's just basically who a rational consumer is. Like me, if I see that the price of Coke today is 250, I can decide to buy 3 bottles because I want to maximize utility at a very low cost. But tomorrow, if it becomes 500 naira, I might just buy one because I don't see the need of spending that much money on Coke. That's just who a rational consumer is. Somebody that is going to buy more baskets of goods, giving a low price and less when the price is high. We're going to be looking at the factors that influence demand. That is the factors that influence demand. First, we have the price of the commodity itself. I just give the example of Coke now. So if the price of Coke increases, my demand definitely will decrease because I'm not going to spend that much on Coke. And if the price of Coke decreases, my demand will increase because now I'm getting more for my money. The price of goods, generally, every consumer would be willing to buy goods. Every consumer will be willing to buy goods at low price, thereby maximizing their utility fully. The next one we have is the prices of related goods. That is the prices of either competitive or complementary goods. The prices of related goods. We can see that for competitive goods, let's use Bonvita and Milo. If the price of Bonvita increases today, because consumers would not want to spend their money because of the increase in price, they will go for Milo that has a lower price just to maximize utility. But if the price of Bonvita decreases, consumers would go and buy more of that good because now the price of Bonvita has come down. Same for Milo. The demand for Milo will decrease. So for competitive goods, when the price of one increases, the demand for the other would increase. But when the price of one decreases, the demand for the other would decrease. I hope that is understandable. Then for complementary goods, that is goods that are used jointly. Without one, the other would not function. Let's use a torchlight for example. Without the battery, it cannot function. So if I'm going to be buying more torchlights, I'll need to get more batteries or more chargers. If I'm going to get a remote, I'll need to buy a battery as well because the remote will not work without a battery. That's just what complementary goods are. Goods that work hand in hand. So if the price of one of those goods decreases, the demand for the other one would increase as well, because when the price of one decreases, the demand for that one will increase, making the demand for the other to increase. Another example of complementary demand is bread and butter. Bread and butter goes together. So, or bread and beans. We have this woman selling beans. She comes out to hawk her beans, and beside her, another woman is selling bread. You know that it goes together, and people would buy both of that. If people buy beans, they'll definitely come to buy bread to go with it. So when the demand for one of those goods increase, the demand for the other would increase. and the demand for a good can be caused by either a decrease or an increase in price. So if there's a decrease in the price of bread, there'll definitely be an increase in the demand for bread and the demand for beans as well, because they are jointly demanded. The same thing, if there's an increase in price, it will lead to a decrease in the demand for beans, and at the same time a decrease in its complement. We also have another factor that affects demand, which is the income of the consumer. The income of a consumer goes a long way in affecting the quantity of goods that consumer will demand. For example, houses. People that earn low to middle income earners would rather rent a house because that is what they can afford given their income. People that earn so much can just decide to build for themselves. Same thing with basic household materials. People that earn low might decide to go for people that earn low can let's use an example of a washing machine. People that have more money to get the washing machine would get it, while those that don't have the income to support that would not get it. It really is that simple. The income of a consumer is one major factor that affects demand. An increase in the income of the consumer would lead to an increase in demand or quantity demanded. An increase in the amount of good that consumer will demand, and a decrease in the income would lead to a decrease in the quantity of goods that consumer would demand. And we all know that there are taxes on income as well. So if there is a higher tax on the income, it will lead to a lower income that would also reduce demand. And if there is a lower tax on the income, it would lead to a higher income that would increase demand. Let me explain it. Let's say I earn 100 naira and my tax on the 100 naira is 10%, that is 10 naira. I have 90 naira to spend. I can decide to buy more things to satisfy my wants. But if my tax is, let's say, 30 naira and I now have 17 naira, that would definitely affect my demand, because I would now decide to manage that income in order to satisfy my wants. Another point of factors that affect demand is the taste and preference of the consumer. If a consumer decides that he wants goods that are flashy and colorful, the consumer would go for it. And let me use an example of clothes. People can decide that they prefer dark clothes, black clothes, and they'll go for that. The demand for that good has increased. The quantity demand of that good has increased. But some people prefer flashy clothes and they'll go for that because of their tastes and their preferences. So the change in tastes and preferences of a consumer in favor of or against a commodity will result in a greater or smaller demand for that commodity. The taste and preferences change according to the nature of some other factors affecting the consumer other than the price and income. For example, during rainy season, you see that umbrellas, raincoats would sell more than in dry season. That's for taste and preferences. Also, we have the expectation of consumers on either a future rise or fall in price. If a consumer is expecting that in future the price of this good would increase, he might decide to buy more of that commodity now to be able to beat that increase in price in future. Or if the consumer expects for the price to decrease in future, he might try to buy less of that commodity now to enjoy the decrease in price in future. We also have the number of consumers in markets that can affect demand. That's another factor that can affect demand. The number of consumers in the market. If there is a higher number of consumers in the market, we would have an increase in the quantity demanded. Same as when there is a lower number of consumers in the market, it would also affect or bring down the amount of goods that would be demanded. Let's use Nigeria and Ghana as an example. Nigeria has a bigger population than Ghana, so investors would rather come and invest here because they know that there is a huge customer consumer base that would purchase that product, rather than going to Ghana that does not really have the amount of consumers that they need. Countries with bigger populations or places with a higher number of children and infants. Some companies might decide to go there to supply their pampers and baby clothes and baby materials and baby everything about babies to that place more than they would supply to places with adults. Like it would be very foolish of somebody to go to a secondary school to sell pampers. Like nobody needs it there. Nobody is going to, except you're selling to the teachers' children. I don't think teachers would bring their children to school. So it is not a good idea to sell pampers in the secondary school. Rather, you can sell food, snacks, or even stationaries, fancy lights and all of that, because students will want to purchase those goods as it satisfies their needs. We have movement along the demand curve and a shift in the demand curve. Movement along the demand curve is also known as change in quantity demanded, or change in quantity demanded, yes, is a movement along the demand curve. Change in quantity demanded is simply an upwards or downwards movement in the demand curve as a result of a fall or rise in price. Basically, an increase or decrease in the number of goods and services, but as a result of a fall or rise in price. In change in quantity demanded, only price can affect the quantity of goods consumers buy. Only price is the only factor that can affect it. Other factors remain constant, just like we can see as the price increased, the quantity of goods demanded came down, while as the price decreased, the quantity of goods increased. We can see that a downward movement in price led to an increase in quantity, which led to a downward movement in the demand curve known as expansion, while the upward movement of the demand curve is known as contraction, as that would lead to a rise in price would lead to a decrease in the quantity demanded. A fall in price would lead to increase in quantity demanded, which will in turn bring the demand curve to slope downwards, which is called expansion. While an increase in price would lead to a fall in the quantity demanded, and the demand curve would slope upwards, which is known as contraction. Like I said earlier, price is the only factor that affects change in quantity demanded. Other factors remain constant. Moving to change in demand, which is also known as a shift in demand curve. This is when demand is affected by all other factors except price. It is affected by change in consumers' preferences, change in income, change in prices of other goods, future expectations, but price does not affect a change in demand. A shift in demand curve or a change in demand is related to the effect on demand for a commodity of a change in a factor other than price of a commodity. That is the increase or decrease in the quantity of goods, but as a result of other factors but price. So in this case, price remains constant. It's basically the opposite of change in quantity demanded, where price was the only factor, all other factors remain constant. But in this case, price remains constant and all other factors change. We can see that a rightward shift in the demand curve indicates an increase in demand, while a leftward shift in the demand curve indicates a decrease in demand. We are going to move now to the exceptions in the laws of demand. Exceptions to the laws of demand, sorry. We have inferior goods. Inferior goods are goods that are purchased mostly when consumers are earning low. When a consumer does not really have money to purchase other goods, the consumer goes for inferior goods. Inferior goods are basically those goods that as the income of consumers increase, the demand for those goods tends to fall, and as the income of consumers decrease, the demand for those goods rise. Example, Gary is used to be a very cheap food for people. So people that low income earners moved to Gary and always saw Gary as like a fast food, where if they don't have money to get good food, they go for Gary. But now it has become more expensive, but we'll move to that. So Gary in Nigeria, or we also have flour in some European countries, are examples of inferior goods. Those goods that are considered cheap for the low income earners, people that earn low. People with low income can get those goods. So people with low income purchase those goods more. Basically, as the income increases, the demand for those goods falls, because people will be like, oh, I have money to get better things now, why will I still go for this thing? Just as a show of class, then moving to another type of inferior goods that are also known as Giffen goods. They were named by a man, an economist named Sir Robert Giffen. He proposed that this type of goods are goods that, as the price increases, the demand for those goods increases, and as the price falls, the demand for those goods fall. An example also using Gary is the way Gary in Nigeria is now. Gary is now very expensive for people, but people are still buying it because it is more like a necessity now. So it is no longer like then when people considered Gary a poor man food. Now everybody is taking it because it is more expensive now and it is a necessity. So that is what Giffen goods are. Then moving to Veblen goods, also known as ostentatious goods. The name Veblen was given by an economist named Thorstein Veblen. He remarked that these goods are purchased by those of the high class, those high income earners. These goods are goods that, as the price of these goods increase, the demand also increases, because people consider these types of goods a show of class. E.g., let's use iPhones now. We can see that everybody wants an iPhone, regardless of how expensive it is, because when you have an iPhone, you're showing that you have money. That is what the society looks at it as. They feel like the moment you have an iPhone, you are rich. So more people, regardless of what they are earning, they just want to get it. No matter, the price continues to increase, but people continue to buy it because it is a show of class. So that's basically what Veblen goods are. We also have jewelries and expensive materials like Aso-Ebi. Everybody wants Aso-Ebi because they are expensive. Regardless of how expensive it is, people will still bring out money. Even if they earn those, people can even borrow just to get it, because it is a Veblen good. It's a good that the type of good that shows class and wealth. Also, we have future expectations that can negate the law of demand. We're still looking at factors or exceptions to the laws of demand. We have future expectations. Okay, if a consumer expects that in the future the price of a particular good would increase, regardless of how low that price is now, that consumer would still, sorry, if a consumer expects that in the future the price would increase, if the price is high now, the consumer will still buy more of those goods because the consumer does not want to spend more in future on those goods. So it negates the law of demand that says a fall in price will lead to an increase in quantity, and an increase in price, sorry, a rise in price will lead to a decrease in quantity demanded. In this case, an increase in price, increase in quantity demanded, decrease in price, decrease in quantity demanded. I hope that is understandable. Then we also have ignorance on the part of consumers. You know, I got a fridge for 340,000 naira. Meanwhile, it is 280,000 naira. But because I don't know how much it is normally, I did not have an idea before. I got it regardless of the price because I did not have an idea before, and that was ignorance on my part. That has affected the law of demand that states an increase in price, decrease in quantity demanded. Because now with an increase in price, I've bought the good. So that's it. We also have change in fashion. What example? Okay, there used to be, okay, let's use radio. Most people don't listen to the radio anymore. Like, radios are now, people still listen to it, but they are more or less like outdated. It's not as, people don't listen to it as much as they used to. So change in fashion, yeah. A change in fashion has resulted to a decrease in the use of that commodity. Let's use cassettes and CDs as another example. Now there are various streaming channels, YouTube, Netflix, to watch your movies, and nobody uses cassettes again. So in this situation, the demand for cassettes has decreased drastically because there is a change in technology. There is a change. So change in fashion can also bring about an exception to the law of demand. Moving on to the types of demands that we have, I might have mentioned some earlier when I was talking about complementary and competitive goods, but now we're going to be looking at it very well. The first one we have is derived demand. Derived demand is basically the demand for factors of production. That is the demand for goods in order to produce more goods. The demand for goods in order to produce more goods. Example is labor, capital, machines, equipment for producing other goods. So this type of demand is a demand for commodities, not for the sake of itself, but for the sake of producing other commodities. We have composite demand. Composite demand is a type of demand that has two or more purposes. That is, it does not just serve one purpose. It has several purposes. Example, we have what can I use as an example? Flour. Let's use flour. So flour is used for baking bread, baking cakes, making cookies, snacks, different things. It's not just used for one thing, and that is an example of composite demand. Demand for a good that serves various purposes, and yeah, demand for goods that serve various purposes. We have joint or complementary demand. I mentioned that earlier. A demand for a good that serves more than, that requires, that is used jointly in order to satisfy a want. It is not just used alone. It cannot function by itself. It is used jointly in order to satisfy a want. And I gave an example of remote and batteries. A remote cannot work by itself. It needs a battery to function. So an increase in the demand for remotes will lead to an increase in the demand for batteries because they are used hand in hand. They are used together. Then we have competitive demand. Competitive demand is also known as substitute demand. It's a type of demand We have when there are two different goods that can satisfy a need. Example, I used Milo and Bonvita. On my side, I like Bonvita. So regardless of how much it is, I would rather get Bonvita than Milo. And that is because of my own taste and preference, which is also an exception to the law of demand. But that aside, competitive demand is a type of demand that can be satisfied, or can be satisfied, yes, with two or more products. There are substitutes for them. So, and in this case, an increase in the price of one, which would lead to the decrease in the demand, would lead to the increase in the price of the other. An increase in the price of one would lead to an increase in the price of the other. So let's use Viva and Good Mama as another example. If Viva decides to as they were just entering the market, they had low price, while Good Mama still remained on the price they were in. But because of the low price, people left Good Mama for Viva because of the price was low. So an increase in the price of Good Mama led to a decrease in the price, an increase in the quantity demanded of Viva. Or rather, a decrease in the price of Viva led to an increase in the quantity demanded of Viva and a decrease in the quantity demanded of Good Mama. We have demand function. What is a demand function? A demand function is an equation that shows the relationship between demand and the factors that affect it. It is more or less like an equation, and it is best read or explained as quantity demanded is a function of have various factors that affect demand, which is like income of the product, income of the consumer, price of the commodity, price of other commodities, taxes, future expectation in the prices of goods, and so on. There are various factors that affect demand. So the equation, or demand function, is an equation that shows the relationship between demand and the factors that affect it. That's basically it on demand. We're going to be moving to supply, the elementary theory of supply, and we're also going to be looking more into demand function and supply functions in the next video. Thank you.